Hello and welcome back to Creating a Positive Impact. Thank you once again for being here. If you've only just joined us for the first time, then welcome. And I'd invite you to go back and check out the previous episodes because we've got some really, really nice ones in there for you. Today, I've got a really great episode lined up for you. It's a topic that I've wanted to cover for a while. Just been waiting for the right person, the right brand to come on and talk about this. So today I'm chatting with Chris Kong, the co-founder of Better Nature Tempeh. Now, if you don't know what tempeh is, don't worry. I wasn't overly familiar with it until a few years ago. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper into, well, of course, what tempeh is, but more importantly than that, the deeper topic of plant-based diets, which of course are kind of becoming more and more common and popular. We talk about the mental health effects of food, and we look at different cultures around the world and how they eat and how they think about convenience food. Now, just before we hear from Chris, I just want to take a moment to thank those of you that have subscribed to the show and giving it a rating so far. If you haven't, hint, hint, there's still time. But just again, the most important thing, the thing I can't measure, I just trust that you'll do if I've done my job properly, is share this episode with a friend or any of the previous guests that you might have enjoyed. If you've got something from those conversations, share that with someone. Okay, on with today's episode. Let's hear from Chris Kong of Better Nature Tempeh. Chris, hello. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to this. As a vegan, this is something I've obviously got a lot of interest in, and I'm really keen to start getting stuck into this wonderful world of tempeh. And I think maybe not everyone's going to know even what that is. So I think let's go back right to the start. Let's have some background on you and Better Nature Tempeh and how this all came about for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, Sam, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to join you and everyone today. Where do we begin? My background, I was born in Hong Kong. I lived there for 13 years before moving to the UK for school, and then I've just been here ever since. And I guess why, if I were to think back and try and reflect on that red thread that links everything together, I think it's obviously very relevant to today's discussion, the podcast of creating a positive impact. For me, it all started when I was about 15 and I was in geography class, and we were studying the conditions that slum dwellers in Calcutta were experiencing. And my geography teacher sort of just let off this off-the-cuff sort of quote. I think it's Luke 12:48 in the Bible.
Okay.
And it goes along the lines of, to whom much is given, much is expected.
Wow.
And
much is given, much is expected. Okay.
It has those like Spider-Man-esque vibes of like, it's like for those that have power to wield it properly. With great power comes great responsibility.
That's it.
I think that's the line in Spider-Man. And it just really got me thinking. And honestly, it kind of haunted me for a little bit, because growing up in Hong Kong, I was born into a loving family. I've got a single mother, so it wasn't all perfect, but it was great. Like, I had nothing to complain about. And I had the opportunity to go to boarding school here in the UK. And that too was phenomenal. And then I just felt, after hearing that quote, I felt really compelled that there's just so many problems on this planet. The conditions that these slum dwellers are encountering on a daily basis, that's terrible. And obviously that is one problem, or a massive set of problems, but there are also massive sets of problems with our environment, right? There are massive sets of problems with the health, the deteriorating health of people all across the planet. Regardless of geography, all across the planet, we are living shorter, unfortunately, actually more miserable lives, whether that's through our diet, whether that's through our habits, our changing habits, decreased activity rates, deteriorating mental health for all sorts of different issues, biodiversity loss, all of that. So I just thought, gosh, with the privilege that I've been born into, with the privilege that I've had, it'd be such a shame for it to be lost. And it was sort of all that was crystallized from that one random geography lesson.
Wow.
So set me on a path of thinking, okay, like what are the gifts that I have that I can wield, or the tools that I have that I can wield to maximize that impact. So I started reading loads of books about what are the best ways basically to use the hours that we have, our careers, to have that positive impact. And one of the things that it sort of came back to again and again and again was entrepreneurship, was starting your own business. Because in that way, you can define entirely what that impact means to you. And in the very early stages at least, you can chart that path, right? You're beholden to no one but yourself and perhaps your team members to bring to life what that vision of that positive impact is, right? So as a result, I think I've always wanted to start my own business, or at least since I was about like 15, 16. But I didn't know what in. I had no idea what in. But I knew I was really good at science. So I've always been like a biologist at heart, even from a young age. When everyone else was reading Harry Potter, I was not having any of that. I was far more interested in literally looking at mold down my mini microscope set, like my super
Nice.
rudimentary set. I was far more interested in exploring the natural world and seeing what was growing underneath topsoil, that sort of thing.
Wow.
Really weird, super weird kid. But so I thought, okay, is there a way in which I can combine those two passions? So I then studied an integrated master's program it's a mouthful, but molecular and cellular biochemistry at the University of Oxford. And it was there when I thought, okay, what if I became the next Sir Alexander Fleming? Like, what if, screw that, what if I'm one of 1,000 of a team, right, that delivered the next penicillin? Wouldn't that have such a tremendous impact? It will not only impact people in my lifetime, but people in subsequent lifetimes, forever and ever, until the end of humanity. So I was really enamored by that idea. But then at university, when I started thinking more deeply about what are the actual problems that we face today, sure, antibiotic resistance is a big problem. But the number one killer of people on the planet today is not it's not viral or bacterial diseases. It's entirely preventable health conditions that are largely determined by our behavior and our diet, specifically.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? Through habit change, through the rise of processed foods, through the rise of obesity, etc. Right? The number one killer, regardless of geography today, are chronic health disorders like coronary heart disease, diabetes, stroke. Right? And forget about the health and the physical implications of those conditions. They obviously also have crippling mental health implications as well, right? If you've got coronary heart disease, you're not going to be very happy, and there's obviously a huge argument to say that stress plays a huge role, lack of activity plays a huge role, and I agree. It is a massively multifaceted issue, but behind these chronic health disorders, right, sort of sits an environment where our physical environment is in decay, right? Where we're in the next big sort of extinction event of species across the planet, and that too can also be linked to our diet, right? We are today the amount of land that is required to feed our protein habits, right, of eating animal-based protein, is equivalent to the land masses of China, Australia, the US, and Canada combined. It's 83% of global farmland is used to either to create crops that feed animals, or to just keep these animals.
Wow.
Imagine the impact that we could have if just 10% of that was rewilded and returned to nature.
Yeah.
Right? In rainforests, in mangroves, etc. So our diet or our dietary choices sits at the nexus of what I think personally are the most pertinent, most pressing issues facing humanity today, be it physical health and well-being, mental health and well-being, and environmental health. So that then inspired me to think a lot more about what I could do to be part of the solution to that. And I started on my plant-based journey. And a lot of this thinking was actually inspired by one of my co-founders, Ellen, who studied psychology at Oxford. That's where we met. And I started reducing my meat consumption. It wasn't easy, having come from a Chinese background, where meat is just so central to so many different amazing dishes, but so are all amazing vegetable proteins like tofu, right? So I started reducing my beef consumption, lamb consumption, and it slowly sort of grew and grew and grew. And before I knew it, I wasn't eating any animal-based products. But I've always been quite athletic. I've always been, really into my running. At uni, I was a boxer, so I represented Oxford against Cambridge, for example, in the varsity boxing match, which was super fun, but meant that I had to pay a huge amount of attention to what I was putting into my body.
Yeah.
And going to supermarket shelves, all I could find was tofu with falafel at one end, or your ultra-processed meat alternatives at the other. And like Corn, Beyond Meat, all these guys, like great tasting products. And really just great products, I believe. Super convenient, super easy to use, right? Slots right in to my burgers and stuff. Yeah. But what if I didn't want to have a burger, right? And I didn't feel comfortable eating these food products every single day.
Yeah.
It just didn't sit right with me. And at the other end of the spectrum, you got your tofus and falafels. But yes, sure, they're all natural. Sure, they're cleaner label, right? You look at the back of pack, it's like, okay, I kind of know what's going on here. But there's only so much tofu and falafel that a person can eat before getting really quite bored.
Yeah.
And nutritionally, it just completely paled in comparison to the chicken that I used to be eating.
Right. Okay.
And what I wanted was a go-to plant-based protein source, a protein staple that was similar to chicken, that doesn't require any animals, that was just inherently more sustainable, etc. And I couldn't find it. So I went looking, and just completely coincidentally, by just pure happenstance, applied for this biotech sort of conference / startup pitching competition that was taking place at the University of Cambridge. And as part of this conference and competition, what they did was that basically scoured the world for 100 delegates, 100 attendees. And about 3 months before the conference, randomly grouped up the 100 delegates into teams of 5. And it sort of ticked that entrepreneurial box. I was like, okay, you know what? This sounds really cool. And in that team of 5 was Triando, one of our other co-founders. And he at the time was doing his PhD on tempeh fermentation. Wow. So that's where tempeh came in. So Triando, he grew up in Indonesia. He's Indonesian himself. He did his bachelor's, his master's in Indonesia. He actually comes from a family of food scientists. So that's why he did his PhD on food science at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, focusing on tempeh fermentation. And for him, and as for many Indonesians, tempeh was his weaning food. It was literally the first solid food he had. And tempeh, for those that don't know, is a fermented food product, right? It's simply made using fermented soybeans. So you start with soybeans, you boil it, so you cook the soybeans, you cool it down, you dry it, and then you inoculate it with starter culture, which is not the same, but rather similar to like a SCOBY or a mother, right, of sourdough, and you leave it in a warm room for about 2 days. And 2 days later, what happens is that the starter culture, right, which consists of basically baby mushrooms, like mushroom spores, they germinate. And as they germinate, they eat away at the fats and carbohydrates of the soybean, but it itself produces its mycelium, which is like the part of the mushroom that you never see. It's the part below, right? And that mycelium sort of feeds off of these carbs and fats, but produces pure protein. The mycelium itself is pure protein.
Right.
But it also holds all the soybeans together. You can think of it as like a network, right, of fibers that holds the soybeans together, packs it together, right, to make it far more efficient to digest effectively. And as a result, what happens is that after 2 days, 48 hours to 2 to 3 days of fermentation, you end up with this meaty, dense cake, so to speak, protein cake that is completely indistinguishable from the boiled soybeans that you began with.
Yeah.
You can think of this cake as this marriage between mushrooms and soybeans. So as a result, tempeh has more than double the protein content of chicken eggs, yet is low in fats and carbohydrates. But because it uses the full bean, it's also packed full of fiber. And because it's a fermented food product, it's also packed full of gut-friendly prebiotics, right? So, and again, what goes in? Water, soybeans, starter culture. There's no plant-based protein that exists today that is more naturally nutritious than tempeh.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize that. So, I mean, obviously I guess you're going to have this a lot, the comparisons probably with tofu, right? Only because really, I guess tofu, I don't know if it's just had the benefit of being around longer. I don't know why it is, but it's a bit more of a ubiquitous, known kind of plant-based food, right? If someone thinks of vegan or plant-based, they think of tofu. So you're saying that tempeh is more nutritionally dense than tofu is. Have I got that right?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think tofu and tempeh are very different, very, very different foods. Like tofu is essentially soy milk, right? So you start with your soybeans, you sort of squeeze the milk out of it, and with the milk, you coagulate it, you curdle it. And as a result, yes, it's still relatively high in protein, but you lose a lot of the protein that's otherwise locked within the bean. That sort of milking process is never going to be 100% efficient.
Right.
But you also lose a lot of the fiber and the iron, the calcium, the potassium, all these amazing vitamins that are otherwise within the soybean, because you lose it in the end product. Okay. So tempeh typically has about 40 to 60% more protein than tofu, but effectively infinitely more fiber. And because tempeh is fermented, it also has these amazing gut health benefits as well.
And then how does that compare to the meat counterpart? So the equivalent, I suppose. I mean, what do you use as a like for like? Do you measure it on a baseline of like calories, or what? Like if you took a block of tempeh and a certain weight of chicken, like what do you use as the baseline, like as an equivalent? Is it proteins per calories or proteins per weight? How do you kind of work that out?
So typically protein per weight.
Okay.
I mean, protein per calories would be fascinating to sort of like dig into. Probably won't take us very long. It's just not something we don't think. I think the whole idea of being fixated on calories is also just a little bit negative. Right?
Yeah.
And calories in, calories out just doesn't work.
Yeah, definitely from a diet perspective, right? I guess the reason I was thinking in those terms is because I think often when we talk about, you mentioned earlier, like the land that we use for animals, right? I think often the the argument I've seen is they base that on calories. So like to get because it's energy, right? See what I mean? Because it's essentially an energy. So you say, look, we need this amount of land to produce this amount of energy, essentially this amount of calories. So I guess maybe that's why I thought it might be is that a good equivalent? That's the energy I'm getting from that food source, and within that is kind of so much protein. But yeah, I mean, you guys know far more than I do. I just thought that would be an interesting way of looking at it.
Tempeh has the equivalent, so it has anywhere between 19 to 24 grams of protein per 100 grams.
Yeah.
So it's anywhere between 19 to 24% protein. Looking at chicken breast, right? Chicken breast has probably like 25 or 27 grams of protein per 100. But you look at chicken thigh and it's less than that, right? So tempeh actually has the equivalent content of protein to cod and mackerel.
Okay.
So sort of like just some fish, a little bit less than chicken breast, but far higher than any other natural source of plant-based protein.
Interesting. And then so from a business point of view, like you guys noticed a gap in the market, you noticed how to make tempeh, and you, I guess, went from there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So going back to the story, like I won't dwell too long on it, but yeah, met Driando. He introduced me to tempeh. Well, tempeh fermentation first, right? Yeah, I was doing my masters. We were nerds, so we're just nerding out about this fermentation process, and I just could not believe that there was this amazing, valorization technology that allows us to convert not just soybeans but any bean, nut, legume, grain, or seed. So any plant-based source of carbs into this higher added value protein source.
Right.
So, because the mushroom spores that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Right. So though soybean, the reason why soybean tempeh is the most popular is because soybeans, first and foremost, grow naturally in Indonesia.
Yeah.
Where tempeh comes from. Tempeh was first, I guess, recorded as a food product in Indonesia 300 years ago. It's also the most widely consumed source of protein in Indonesia, full stop, today. Indonesia being the 4th largest country on the planet.
Wow,
right?
okay.
So there, it is literally a staple.
Yeah.
People eat it all the time. And it's literally sold on every street corner. You can't go to Indonesia and escape tempeh. Right? In the same way that you can't go to China or Japan and not find something made out of tofu. Right? It is just everywhere.
Yeah.
The surprising thing is that you come out to the West, take a 12-hour flight out to the West, and it's nowhere to be seen. Right? Or at least it was nowhere to be seen. So that was really intriguing to me. But the fermentation process was also absolutely fascinating. So Andy and I, we just got on so well, and he was based in the US, I was in the UK. So as part of this pitching competition, the startup pitching competition that we were both sort of like enrolled in, I would sort of work on the pitch during my night, his afternoon. He'd work on his night, which is like basically my early morning, and as the cycle went, just like constantly back and forth, and refining the business idea. At that time, I had done an internship at McKinsey, so the strategy consulting firm. I thought like, well, I want to have this positive impact. I don't know what in really. I didn't feel equipped, right? With my degree in biochemistry, I didn't feel equipped to sort of tackle the business world like head on from the get-go.
Yeah.
So I thought consulting may be a good sort of like first step. So I was already aware of like what makes a good business model and all that stuff, right? So I had that scientific lens, but more from the BD side of things. He was that pure scientist. I was the Wozniak to his jobs, so to speak, right? Like, and we just, and 3 months later we pitched and we ended up winning. Out of 20 teams from the world's best universities, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, you name it, they were all there. We ended up winning. I had this job offer with McKinsey on the line, so I was meant to join after graduating. But I was like, this sounds super interesting. Why don't we give this a go? So I went back to McKinsey, asked them like if they could give me another year, just to play around with this idea, see where it went, and they said yes. So I then spent, I went out to Indonesia. I spent time with Ando and his family. I understood this is where I came to appreciate just how prevalent tempeh was over there. Came back to the UK and started doing like the market research, competitor analysis, all of that. That was like, what competitor analysis? Like, but what a market. And this was back in 2019, right? Where Beyond Meat had just IPO'd, right? And they were $1 billion company. And it was just like Beyond Meat and Impossible was just dominating every headline. McDonald's started using Beyond Meat. Burger King started using all these sort of products. It was just going everywhere.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, tempeh will never be able to compete from an indulgence perspective because we're not trying to create an indulgent food. We're trying to create a staple. We're trying to create something that people can eat day in and day out. We're trying to create a food product that could truly embed itself into everyday habits, right?
Yeah.
That is genuinely healthy, right? In order to be that staple, had to be genuinely healthy. And of course, it's delicious in its own right. I'm not trying to say that it's not delicious, but it's just not. It doesn't bleed.
Yeah.
It doesn't. You put it on a pan and it doesn't sort of like ooze all this oil and stuff, right?
It's not imitating anything else, is it? It just is what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is what it is. So it was in 2019 where I then reached out to Ellen. And I was like, she was the one to set me on the path, did psychology. After she graduated, she did a degree. No, sorry, not a degree. She started working in branding, marketing, and PR agencies. And I was like, we need to create a brand. We need to get tempeh out there. We need to, but I didn't know how to do that. I can barely draw. So I reached out to Ellen and then she joined. And Fabio, who's the fourth and final co-founder, he was a product developer at a mycoprotein startup at the time. And between myself, Ellen, and Ando, none of us had any experience in actually producing a food product. Like, we can theorize about it. We knew all the science behind it. We can create a pretty brand, but no one actually knew how to get products made safely, consistently, and then again, get delivered from point A to point B, right, to the retailer's shelves. So that's where Fabio came in. And so it was us four. And in that year, we raised our first round of funding. We crystallized our business plans. And I told McKinsey, see you next time. So,
wow, what a story.
Man. See you never, really.
Wow, but, that's crazy. So that's so cool, man. That's so cool. I love stories like that. There's entrepreneurial kind of that synergy and bringing everyone together with their expertise, because no one can do this alone, right? So if you're trying to put something out, and I think really what you're doing, you're trying to change a culture, right? You're trying to change the way we think about food at home. Like, that's no small feat. So you definitely need people around you. We've mentioned a number of times like various other kind of alternative proteins and food sources. We mentioned Beyond and Impossible, and this really is one of the big things that I wanted to pick your brains about. And it's a worry that I have. Okay, now I've struggled to word this, so bear with me as I try and piece it together, but I'm hoping you can understand where I'm coming from. I am vegan. I've been for, I think, coming up to about 3 years now, so plant-based diet. And for what I've seen with every veganuary normally is new vegan products coming to market, okay? And I can't help but think, I'm going through my supermarket, I've got, and we've always had, pretty much everything I'd ever need for a good, balanced, plant-based diet. And most of it lies in the fruit and veg aisle, right? Just whole foods, fruit, veg, nuts, these kind of things. Yeah. Now, brands, companies, can't come along and make carrots sexy, right? They can't package them up. They can't brand them. They can't kind of do much with them as they are, okay? And so what's left, the room for innovation lies in, it's in burgers and it's in imitations and these fake meats. And now there's loads of them. There's so many of those brands, and I do absolutely love them. Like I've got Beyond Meat burgers in my fridge now. I've got the squeaky bean stuff. Like it is nice. There is no way around it. The concern with it is that these are processed, ultra processed foods. There's a lot going in there that I don't really know what these ingredients are, and I want to eat cleaner. And so my worry is that the plant-based diet, the vegan diet, is kind of getting unhealthier with sort of as things, I want to use progress in quotes, because by progression I mean more products come out and it's new ways to capture, bring people into that market, bring people into a plant-based diet, which I think is ultimately beneficial for us all. But I do worry about where it's going and what the health implications are. I mean, what's your take on that? Do you think, is that something you see as well, or do you disagree with that?
So the really interesting thing is that the market's already telling us where it's going to go, or where it's currently going. You're right. Yeah, healthy whole foods have existed since the beginning of agriculture, right? And supermarkets, they're greengrocers, right?
Yeah.
And they just kept on adding more stuff. The issue with just fruits and veg and nuts is that not everyone knows how to cook with them, right? They can be quite expensive, and they do, maybe not nuts, but they do lack in protein. So we created a culture that got its protein from meat, right? Where meat or something similar had to be that center of plate, right? And I think it's a wider topic of discussions, like why can't amazing vegetables be that center of plate? And there are some amazing restaurants out there that focus solely on those amazing vegetables, nuts, legumes, etc., in that center of plate. But I think for most people, cost is always going to be a concern. Convenience is always going to be a concern. Taste, right, is going to be, you need a very high level of education to make legumes and plants taste good.
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Or culinary education, whereas with a steak, you literally just slap it on the pan for 7 minutes and it tastes amazing. Right? Can't deny that.
Yeah.
So I think all of these reasons played into why we need a plant-based category, because people are looking for nutrition, people are looking for center of plate proteins, people are looking for quick, convenient, easier solutions than, say, buying a tin or even buying raw chickpeas, right, from the supermarket.
Yeah.
I think we're a very long way to get there, and people need solutions, right? Not everyone has the time nor the money to afford these fresh ingredients. So that's why I think the plant-based category exists and should exist. Within the plant-based category, going back to your other question, which is like, where is it heading? So what we've seen actually last year in 2023, I think 2023 is a pivotal moment for the plant-based industry, both in the UK, but abroad everywhere. What we saw was that meat alternatives, the sale of these meat mimics, these imitations, declined after bumper years of growth, right?
Yeah.
And you can attribute that decline to many reasons. You can attribute it to, for example, the cost of living crisis, right? But fundamentally, the reason why that decline happened is because the number one reason why consumers are shopping from the meat-free category is due to health concerns.
Right.
And these meat mimics, imitations, consumers started doubting whether or not they were healthy.
Yeah. I'd say
And
that's probably where I'm at, to be honest, right now. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's probably the question I'm asking.
I'm saying this as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
But this is my interpretation of it. The numbers would suggest that what I'm saying is correct.
Yeah.
Right? And what retailers are seeing as well, right? Obviously, that's where the numbers come from.
Yeah.
And health is the number one reason why consumers are shopping from the category. Consumers are start doubting the health credentials of these products. These products tend to be more expensive, so the cost of living crisis exaggerated the whole issue. So then became like, well, if these products are more expensive and they're not actually that healthy for me, why am I buying these products?
Yeah.
Right? So that's the question mark that everyone's like consumers start having, and that's what triggered the decline in the meat alternatives side of things. But what we're actually seeing is that more than ever, consumers are still interested in reducing their meat consumption.
Absolutely.
More than ever, consumers are still interested in putting more veg into their diets, right? Think Tim Spector and the gut health stuff.
Yeah, this is what I was going to ask you about. Like the conversation now is like clean eating and gut health, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. Like varied diets, as many colors as you can. Think about crisps and ultra-processed people, right? The pushback on ultra-processed food. People are looking for healthier foods. So what we're seeing actually is that amidst this decline in meat alternatives, there are pockets within plant-based that have actually outperformed the market and have continued to grow.
Yeah.
And these are things like tofu and tempeh, right? Because fundamentally, these are healthy, minimally processed plant-based proteins that tick all the boxes from a health, nutritional, convenience, accessibility perspective, but don't come with the baggage of being processed, right? So that's, and I think where the market is going to head is to continue that direction, right? I find it personally a little bit, not to say that I think Beyond Meat and stuff are going to go bust. No, I think there'll always be a role, right? There's always going to be space, especially as plant-based continues to grow. There's always going to be space for brands that create these amazing, indulgent foods. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're not all healthy all of the time, are we? There's space for convenience, isn't there? Yeah, and it's not like their meat counterparts are any healthier. So I mean,
no, exactly, right? So for example, there's an amazing brand called Juicy Marbles.
Yes.
They produce whole cut steaks.
Big fan.
During Valentine's Day, right? Their sales went through the freaking roof.
Oh, really? Wow, interesting.
Absolutely through the roof, right? So I think that is what, but people are returning back to more scratch cooking.
Yes.
Right? People are returning more to, I guess, also amidst the cost of living crisis, just cooking more, right? And going out less. So I think where the market is going to head is towards, in one direction, towards more whole foods, plant-based, natural, clean label proteins. Like tofu and tempeh, but as well as towards more sort of ingredients, scratch cooking, whole cut meat alternatives. So I don't think the alternatives are going to go. I just think they'll need to evolve.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I wonder, like, because when you say we, I guess you mean like the UK market, because something I guess I'd want to know a bit more about is my understanding of how Britain in particular ended up in this very convenience winning in food dates back right to like the kind of industrial era where it was all about packing as much calories into a pasty so that the guys could go to the factories and work all day and have a working lunch, and essentially home cooking kind of vanished. It all became about convenience, and it that kind of took hold there. And that's, I think that still kind of exists now. We have the meal deal, right? Like we do work on convenience. And in other countries, that hasn't really happened. You look at somewhere like Italy, for example, cooking fresh is like such a key core part of the culture. What's your experience of, let's say, Indonesia? Because tempeh being as prolific and as commonplace as it is there, do they have a culture of convenience? Do these meat alternatives exist in Indonesia, and are they popular, or are they more culturally just like, no, we're going to cook with fresh ingredients, so this is what we have, and this is, I suppose that culture difference is kind of interesting, right?
It's super interesting. So it is becoming, meat alternatives are becoming more popular in Indonesia.
Right.
But you can imagine, due to all sorts of different reasons, they're a bit of a laggard in the adoption of meat alternatives. I think a lot of these, like, as a rapidly developing country, first and foremost, you just want to put food on the table, right? And secondly, you want to make sure that you have a roof above your head, that your kids can go to school, that you've got your healthcare covered, right? So thinking about reducing your meat consumption and doing all these sort of altruistic things comes so low in your agenda that it's only really the privileged that can really think about that. And yeah, obviously totally appreciate that. It makes sense. But in Indonesia, I think like a lot of developing countries, like convenience is critical. And it's because of it's the guys like Nestle and Unilever, they have gone in and been like, okay, we've got cereal here in the West, let's bring it to Indonesia. We've got these high fat, sugar, salt foods, let's bring it to China, Indonesia, all across, right, the developing world. So crisps are a really big issue. I mean, childhood obesity is just a big problem, not just in the Western world, but really the whole world, right? Because of that issue. These foods taste so good, right? And if you grew up in a family where your parents remembered not being able to put food on the table, you're not going to care that the crisps they're eating are high in calories or whatever, right? You're not going to care. It's like it's food. It's great tasting, convenient, cheap food. So I get it. I mean, convenience is very big. So like instant noodles, for example, very, very big thing all across Asia, especially in Indonesia. And
So I was really surprised by
that tradition, I think. I mean, they're losing that tradition of cooking from scratch, but like in all human traditions and cultures, cooking together as a family, right? As a unit, as a social unit, and sharing a meal has always been central to society, and unfortunately that's being lost.
That is a shame, isn't it? That doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel like progress.
Unfortunately, yeah, progress, I think, typically, it always has, like all progress is double-edged, right? Think about the advent of nuclear technology, right? It could be the savior of humanity at one end, but also the harbinger of complete and total destruction.
Yeah.
Think about like the steam engine, right? Amazing. Got electricity, but now we need to create more steam. So now we need to burn more coal.
Yeah.
So it's like...
Yeah, no, you're right.
It's always...
I've thought about that a lot lately. It's come up recently, like this idea of being able to hold two opposing truths. Like nothing's ever as simple as black or white. It's all very grey. Like, I think a good example might be, we talk about phones and tech a lot and how damaging they are to kids, and we're all buried in our phones all the time. But at the same time, and that's totally true, at the same time, I've got a couple of apps on my phone that have just genuinely given me so much value and improved my life that I don't know what I'd do without them. Like,
exactly.
There's often this real grey area. Nothing's ever as simple as this or that.
100%. I mean, there's an amazing book that I read ages ago by Matt Ridley called The Rational Optimist.
Right.
Which is all about, like, talks about this quite a lot, how we've actually made a tremendous amount of progress and that there is optimism that we will continue making that progress. Like, yes, today's problems are bad, but it's far better, I personally believe, other people have their own opinions, it's far better to be where we are today than to have a population whose average life expectancy is like 35 years old, and where 50% of kids don't make it past the age of 2, right? Yeah. Where women are unfortunately uneducated, right? Where there's yes, there is huge income disparity today, but even some of the poorest people that live in today's Western society, right, in the UK, have access to better healthcare, education, right, and an opportunity than the privileged few of centuries ago. So I would argue that is progress.
Yeah.
The question is, at what cost? And the question is, can we innovate and make enough progress to offset and kind of unwind the damage that has been done to date on things like human health and the environment?
Yeah, massive.
So that is the big question.
Yeah. And that's exactly, I suppose, where you as a company, that's where you cross over with that kind of stuff, right? This as you said, like between the environment and mental and physical health. I'm interested, actually, I didn't pick you up on it earlier, but the mental health side of food, what your take on that is. I think that's something that you speak about quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, like food ultimately should be nourishing. Nourishing for your body from a strict nutritional perspective, but also nourishing for the soul, nourishing for your relationships, nourishing, it's just a source of nourishment for your life, right? Food is a highly emotional topic. It's why the world hates vegans, right? Because vegans, unfortunately, have been demonized to be like, stop eating the foods that you love. I think some of the criticism is deserved.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm not saying that what these vegans have done is wrong, right? But I think the solution is to be much more inclusive. Right? That's my personal take on it. And people will do what they want. We just need to make it easier for them to make the right choices, whether it be for themselves or for the environment or for animal welfare, etc. That's my sort of like BD sort of like hat on, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
We just gotta make it, if it's cheaper, if it's easier, if it's better, then it will sell itself. Basically.
Yeah, not going to get anywhere by villainizing people, are we? That's
exactly.
never worked.
You just alienate people, and you start creating a me against you type mentality, right?
Yeah.
And this is not just in food. This is like literally
of course,
politics and everything.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, isn't it? It's
way too
when
easy.
Things get emotional and heated, and it's just
exactly. I think it all comes down to just we as humans need to have patience, right, and the open-mindedness to understand each other. And as a co-founder of a food brand trying to change cultures, we need to understand why it is that people are adopting the habits, the staples, right, the foods that they're having now. And if you spend enough time with that topic, you can't blame anyone for any decision that they've made, right? Whether they grew up in a certain environment, whether they were taught certain things growing up for whatever reason, right? You can't blame them, right? And blaming, as well as we just mentioned, is just not going to lead anywhere. So you just need to understand. You need to become aware, and by growing your understanding, the solution, right, your ability to influence behavior massively increases, right? Because you'll understand what levers you need to pull in order to shift that behavior. So I actually completely forgot what it is that we were originally talking about.
No, I don't.
But
no, I don't. No, I have. I mean, I quite like where we went though. No, that's probably, because it is an interesting part of the conversation, isn't it? Like sort of the, this element of plant-based versus the rest, and this kind of two sides almost. And I think we often sort of the activism side of things and the best approach to try and change the culture of how we eat. And it is so tricky, and it's something I think about all the time, and I have a lot of different conversations about it. Some I think more effectively than others. Sometimes I think I'm talking to someone and there's just no chance in this world that they're going to sort of come away from a conversation with me thinking differently about how they eat. You can't change everyone's, but that's me as an individual. I suppose it is quite interesting to hear from a business point of view how you navigate those kind of conversations and conflicts and those sort of different people involved.
Yeah, I mean, we don't. Conflict is never the solution. Conflict is bad in so many ways. It's always for us as a brand, and there's some live off that conflict, right?
Yeah.
The way to galvanize people to join your cause, right? A me against you mentality is powerful. But as a brand, where we stand personally, or it's not personally, I think Better Nature, is that we need to be as inclusive as possible, accessible as possible, positive as possible, positive mission. And then that is how you drive long-term sustainable behavior change, is through positivity. And this has all really come from Ellen, from her psychology background, and she's super passionate about this, right? Like all long-term behavior change has always stemmed from a root in positivity, never in negativity. Negativity, for example, body shaming, weight shaming, calorie guilting, right? This is all like, these are powerful in helping people drop loads of weight quickly. But are you going to get them to continue to adopt those behaviors over time? No, right? So a study was made on terrible TV program like Weight Watchers or The Biggest Loser in the US. The only person who actually managed to keep that weight off is the person who kept on exercising after the program, and they kept on exercising because they enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's it. Let's keep the positivity going as we wrap up. I think the last thing I really want to ask you, and to be honest, there's so much I could, but I'm conscious of time. I would like to give you the opportunity to extend this positivity and to nominate someone that you think is really making a positive impact in the world. They're doing really great work to make the world a better place. It could be an individual, a business, an organization, someone you know, someone you don't, but anyone that you think is doing some great work.
I want to give a shout out to Vivian and Howard Wong at Little Moons. I think their approach to indulgence, right, and that savory occasion is just masterful. And they never ever shame people for wanting to have a cake after their meal, but for them it's all about the enjoyment of having this little moon, this mochi, right? And I love that, and it's calorie controlled. Brilliant. Like that's a bonus. The product itself is fantastic and tastes amazing, right?
They are good.
I love that. That is like one way in which we can get people to reduce their sugar, intake and sweet intake. You don't need to replace the products full of sweeteners instead of sugar. You don't need to guilt people into eating, into not enjoying dessert. I think that's so I think what they did was so smart, and they're also amazing individuals. I also want to give a shout out to Paul Brown, who's the founder of Ball. I actually had the privilege to meet him in person yesterday, so that's why that name sort of sprung to mind. In 2016, I believe. Before 2016, Ball's been around for I think almost 9 years now. Before 2016, they had meat in their products. And in 2016, before veganism and plant-based foods and all that was sexy, he drew a line in the sand and was like, from this day on, we're not going to have any more animal-based products in our foods, in our meals, in our soups, in things that typically would have meat in. And again, before veganism and plant-based stuff and gut health and all this stuff was sexy, right? And mainstream. He sort of drew the line down and was like, this is it. I'm not going to do it anymore. So overnight, they had to they basically lost 50% of the revenue, given that 50% of the range had meat in. And that leadership is just like, and that vision, that confidence, the bravery, right? I can't even imagine where he started with breaking this news to his investors to say, like, I'm sorry, tomorrow we're going to be half the size we are today.
Maverick, real maverick.
Yeah, but that boldness and commitment to the cause, to the vision is truly so inspirational. So yeah, massive shout out to Paul.
That's great. That's a brilliant place to wrap up. Chris, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. That's brilliant. I could have gone for a good couple of hours there, but let's call it a day. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you so much, Sam. And what you're building with this podcast, the positivity that you're looking to spread is phenomenal. And no doubt you've inspired many people to try and live a life with more positive impact. So thank you so much for your work as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's really kind of you to say. Thank you.
Some lovely words from Chris at the end there. I do hope that in some small way this show has helped you make some decisions and steps forward towards creating more positive impacts of your own. It's a great journey to be on and part of. And I'm so lucky that part of my job is to sit here and chat with these amazing change makers from all around the world. There's so many great people out there like Chris and brands like Better Nature whose creativity and innovation have given us more ways in which we can improve our lives and the lives of those around us, and perhaps even more importantly than that, the lives of future generations. We talk a lot on this show about big picture versus small at-home actions. The big picture being things like carbon capture, like when we spoke to Undo, whereas something like changing your diet and bringing in more plant-based foods, and in particular in this case, tempeh, these are small things that we can all try. We can all try these at home easily. And if enough of us do that, that cumulative effect, that compounding effect actually does start to make some real difference. I've got one more great episode coming up before I take a brief break to go and have some paternity leave, believe it or not. By the time this goes out, I may have already welcomed my second child into the world. But I'll be back next week and then taking that short break while I spend some time with my family and go through the craziness that is the first few weeks of being a parent. So until then, take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you next week.